Well, hello, everyone, and we are so glad that you've joined us for another live edition of the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner. And of course, I'm your host, retired Army First Sergeant Paul Holbert. We are so glad that you joined us this evening, and it's because of audiences like you that's made our show successful. And I want to thank you for watching us, whether it's live or on the taped shows that are posted by the studio. It's the audience who's made us successful and helped us actually make the list of the top 25 videos here in Fairfax County, out of Fairfax County in Northern Virginia. So we want to thank you for joining us. Before we get to our guest tonight, I want to thank our sponsors, of course, Quest Jewelers from Merrifield, Virginia. Folks, I've said it before, Quest Fine Jewelers has some beautiful stuff in the store and their showroom, on their website, in their catalog. So if you're looking for a special piece for that someone or a custom piece that you want to have made, they can do it. Give them a call. There's their number. There's their website, questjewelers.com. Take a look and see what they have to offer you. I also want to thank Nationwide IT Services. NIS is a service disabled veteran-owned small business owned by retired Army Warrant Officer C.K. Park. C.K. and his crew, they have offices around the United States as they work on various contracts and can help you with your business needs, whether it's IT training, support, security, program management, training, whatever it is you need. His company is there to help you. So take a look there, give them a call, look at their website at nw-its.com and give them a call. They'll be glad to help you out. I also want to mention tonight that we're getting ready to pick up a new sponsor, and we should have them completely ready by next week's show. But Hill and Ponton, PA, Veterans Disability Attorneys out of Florida. You can see their website, hillandponton.com, and their phone number. The other interesting thing about Hill and Ponton is they specialize in Agent Orange toxic chemical, and there it is, part of their website, hillandponton.com, Fort McClellan toxic exposures, things that veterans need to know. Hill and Ponton is a legal organization that assists veterans and their families in getting the things that they're entitled to from their military service when they run into struggles with the VA or with Social Security. They do a lot of pro bono work. They have a lot of free videos up. They hold free podcasts about what to do and provide information. So we're happy to have them on board, and we should have them fully on board by next week. All right, so let's get into tonight's show. And kind of interesting tonight, I'd like to introduce to you Billy Cagle. Now, the interesting thing is Billy and I kind of, we're around the same age, born the same year in 1959. Billy grew up in Decatur, Alabama, and he and I were actually college friends and buddies at Clark College back in 1978, 79? I'm telling our age, man.
Yeah.
And so Billy and I chewed a lot of dirt together in college and spent a lot of time in I still remember Dean Garner's German class that we enjoyed, did a lot of things together. And it's good to see him again because we lost touch for so long. And then a couple years ago, we were able to make touch again at Facebook. Now, Billy actually went to Clark College where I ran into him, and then he went on to Blue Mountain College and then continued on to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth, Texas. The interesting thing was Billy pastored for about 37 years. And now that he's kind of like me, he's getting up into the older age rank. I guess you could say he's kind of semi-retired, but he does security work, and he's also done counseling work with juvenile offenders. So, I've had a pretty good life of public service, I would say, haven't you, Billy?
Yeah, it keeps me busy. I've enjoyed it. I have a lot of good memories, met a lot of good people. It's been a blessed life. It sure has.
Well, I also want to mention something, too, that we're going to talk about Billy's father here in just a minute, who was a dual service veteran, served in two different branches of the military. But before we do, I'd like to put out an in memoriam college classmate of Billy and mine from Clark College back in the 70s. Lance Corporal Stephen B. Bland. We lovingly called him Tex. Stephen was quite a character, wasn't he?
He was.
He
Yes,
was
he
a character, and I still remember those days. The mornings we go in his room and put on the Isley Brothers when
Yeah.
he was asleep, and you'd see him start dancing under the covers. You just never forget things like that. But Steve and I mean, Tex, in honor of Tex, Lance Corporal Stephen Bland. The reason why is I later found out when I was actually stationed in the 101st at Fort Campbell that Stephen was one of the Marines killed in 1983 in the Beirut barracks bombing. So, we just wanted to kind of put that out in remembrance of our college roommate, Steve. And, just to remind people, folks that we grow up with, we know when we're younger, we meet later on in life, people that serve in the military. Sometimes we never really know what happens to them. And, some of them made the ultimate sacrifice. So we just want to remember Lance Corporal Bland for that as well.
Yeah, he was a character. I remember we would go to his room and you would say, Tex, are you going to class today? And he would go,
Yeah.
You remember that?
Yeah, had to put on the music to get him out of bed. Yeah.
He was not a scholar, but he was.
Yeah. So. But it was people like that kind of made the college days what they were.
Oh yeah, that's the kind of days you remember. Yeah, I don't remember a lot of my classroom, but I remember a lot of the characters I went to school with. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Well, Billy, I'm glad you could make it on tonight because we want to talk a little bit about the story about your father and
Okay.
Of course, your dad. I think it's interesting. William E. Cagle is a veteran of both the U.S. Army and the U.S. Navy. And I know your dad was born in Alabama in 1934 and graduated from Carbon Hill High School. The interesting thing was, I see from reading the information that he joined the Army and went to Fort Jackson and then later on deployed to Korea.
Yeah.
And so what do you remember about your dad in that time? What can you share with us?
Well, first of all, let me say this, and he always found this very interesting. He was born on May 23rd, 1934, and we found out that's the exact day, not date, but the exact day that Bonnie and Clyde were killed outside of Gibbsland, Louisiana.
Oh.
And we were going through Shreveport when I was in Fort Worth, and we stopped. They have a little museum there, and they were killed on May 23rd. 1934, the exact day that my dad was born, and he was always he was amazed by that, And but my father lived in. I was raised in Decatur, but he was born in a little town called Nauvoo, Alabama, and it was a coal mining town. My granddaddy, John Cagle, was a coal miner. His grandfather came from Wales, and he was a coal miner. And so Dad did not want to work in the mines. He thought about it one time. He said his dad took him in this little door like a dumbwaiter, and they went down, 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 and got out. And he said it freaked him out. And he said, so either you go to college, go to the military, or you're going to work here in the mines. And so Dad joined the Army, which, interesting enough, was during the Korean conflict.
Yeah.
And he went to Fort Jackson. I don't know a lot about his Army days. He wouldn't talk a lot about it. I know more about his Navy, but I do know this. He was in Fort Jackson. And then at some time he was at Fort McClellan, because I know he served as a military policeman sometime, but not always. I know when he was in Korea, if my mind is correct, he was with the 3rd Armored Division, but he was infantry, and he got to be a sergeant. Then he went, while he was there, they had the ceasefire because he got there in 1953, and then he went to Alaska, and that's where and I don't know if he was in Korea and came home and went to Fort Jackson. I also know, and I don't know the timeline, but he spent some time in Fort Dix, New Jersey. I know that. But I do know that he talked a lot about Alaska. He talked about how, how beautiful it was and how cold it was, and
Yeah.
but he had a lot of
Especially,
pictures of Alaska.
well, no, I was just going to say, especially being an old Alabama boy from down in the South.
Yeah,
So, well, Korea's cold enough. I can tell you, I had 3 tours over there,
yeah,
and I'm sure he got a shock there when he went because it was cold as could be in Korea. And there are, of course, parts of Alaska that are just as cold.
yeah.
So I'm sure that was something new to him. I'm sure.
Yeah, but one of the things, there was a guy in his company in Alaska that became a pretty famous country singer. If you know anything about country music, a guy named Farron Young. I don't know if you've
Oh
ever heard of Farron
yeah.
Young. Well,
Oh,
Dad
that's
was
some
in
old time country there,
yeah.
man.
Well, Daddy was in the Army with Farron, knew him,
Oh
and
my
said
gosh.
said he'd sit around the barracks and play his guitar and sing, and they would have shows and he would sing. And Daddy said when he got out, next thing you know, Farron became a big Nashville star,
Yeah.
and he knew him. But my dad is funny. Now, when he was in Korea, I know that he faced the Red Chinese, and the
Yeah.
reason why I know that, Paul, you'll find this interesting, is that he was in his 70s before he would try Chinese food. I couldn't get him to try it.
Wow.
And he'd say, "I ain't gonna eat that communist mess," he'd do all that, And I said, "Dad, you like vegetables? It's just stir-fried vegetables and stuff." And so after he ate it, that's all he wanted until he died. If we went out, he wanted Chinese food. And being a veteran, I was a kid in the '60s. I wanted to make sure I told you this. You remember the old comedy Laugh In?
Oh,
Rhoda
sure.
Martin.
Yeah.
Well, my dad, he had a good sense of humor, but he hated Tiny Tim. You remember Tiny Tim? Hip
Yeah.
throws. When Tiny Tim came on, he would say, "Turn that blankety blank television now." He hated Tiny Tim. He couldn't stay. He'd get mad. I mean, he would literally get mad when he would see Tiny Tim.
Let me guess. Was it the long hair?
I think that, and the voice.
The
And
voice?
I'm not gonna, I'm gonna be real nice, but he called him some pretty colorful things.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you know what? That's kind of old school because yeah, I remember Tiny Tim on Laughing, and
Oh
there were a
yeah.
lot of people that kind of thought him to be pretty odd.
Even then, I know.
And
Yeah.
that's putting it nicely.
Yeah.
Now, of course,
Oh, yeah.
compared to today's standards, he was very tame.
He's tame now. Yeah. Of course, my dad, passed away in 2011.
Yeah.
And, but what's kind of funny, when we would have all these weird things go on, he'd look at me, and he'd say, "Country's been going to hell since John Wayne died." That's what he'd say that over and over and over. And,
You know what? I got to tell you, man, your dad sounds like he just kind of reminds me of some of the crusty old guys that I've run into,
Oh
and
yeah, yeah,
some of the folks in my family before that. But you said your dad was at Fort McClellan, Alabama, and I know that's where the MP Corps trained and
Okay,
all that
yeah,
kind of stuff.
yeah.
It's kind of interesting because yeah, I spent some time at McClellan as well during my career because the Army's Chemical Corps was stationed there. The one
Yeah,
we
that's
dealt with the
true.
chemical biological warfare,
Yeah.
and I took training there several times during my career.
Okay.
And then they since moved all that to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Okay.
I don't know where it's at now, but Fort McClellan is closed.
Yeah, I knew that. Yeah.
But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see. So let me ask you this though. I mean, while your dad was in the Army,
Mm-hmm.
did you notice anything? How old were you during this time? First, while he was in?
I wasn't. I was in the Navy when he was born. When I was born, he was in the Navy.
Oh, okay, all right.
I said he
So-
got. He was in the Army in '53, and he met my
Oh
mother.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
met-
Thank
he
you
met-
for
Yeah.
thank
he
you
met
for
my mother.
fixing that for me.
He met my mother, and I think in '56 they got married. No, '55 they got married in '56. My sister was born in '57. I was born in '59.
Okay.
But he went in '53. So 4 years after that, he got out of the Army.
Yeah.
And then he couldn't find a job here in Alabama. I know that he went up north for a little while to Indiana, hated it, came home. I was a baby then, but mother said that, or I wasn't even born then. That's right. she was pregnant with me. And then he said, well, I think I'll join the Navy. And he did. And while he was in the Navy, he became an electrician. That's where he learned to be an electrician. But
Yeah.
because he was a combat veteran, now back then, he did not have to go to Navy basic training. They let him go.
Yeah.
He enlisted, and they let him go straight to South Carolina to wherever the school was that they trained electricians. And
Yeah.
he did that. So, and when I was born, he told me he was in the Aegean Sea on a carrier when I was born, you know. So, but I do now. You know, he stayed in the Navy a while. I remember his Navy days. He was on two carriers that I remember. He was on the Essex and the Saratoga.
Wow.
And
Okay.
so, you know, I remember that. And he was an electrician. And we lived in Charleston, South Carolina for a while, Jacksonville, Florida. But when he would go on those 6-month cruises, we would come back to Alabama and live with my granddaddy and grandmama Cagle.
Yeah.
Now, you being military, my grandfather Engel, I never met him. He was killed in World War II in North Africa in 1942 at the Battle of Kasserine. He was killed there. And
Okay.
so my mother was 3. And when he was killed, she don't remember her dad. So the only grandfather I had was my granddaddy Cagle. And so we would live with them when Daddy would be on those 6-month cruises, you know. And because he would leave and he'd go, you know, they'd be gone for 6 months at a time. And remember that, you know.
Well, I understand too that of course he was in the middle, or he was out in the Navy and all that too when they had the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh yeah, well let me tell you about that. He was at that time he was they were in Guantanamo Bay.
Oh wow!
And he had a buddy of his from Tennessee. I can't remember the guy's name. He did, and he was in photograph reconnaissance and or reconnaissance photography. And he said, Daddy said one day they were eating lunch, and he said, "I want to show you something." And Dad said he went in there and he said, "I want you to look at this." He gave him a magnifying glass, and he said, "What do you see?" Of course, Dad, he said, "I don't know." And the guy said, "Well, I think they're missile silos. I'm not sure." And he called this ensign. Ensign came in, and Daddy said the next thing you know, they were escorted out, and all the big brass came in. And then the next thing you know, they had the Cuban Missile Crisis. So my dad was one of the very first people to see a picture of the missile silos.
Yeah, you know, that would be, I mean, that would be really, really interesting because that's one thing I enjoyed during my military time was I got to go to some places where there was a lot of military history. Nuremberg, Germany was big. But even in Korea, you probably remember when the North Koreans charged that tree in the DMZ and axe murdered a number of U.S. soldiers.
I remember that. Yeah.
So, you know, of course, when I was in Korea, I got to go there to that site. One of my units I was in an aviation unit over there one year. And it just so happened that my company commander, who was a major then, was one of the medevac pilots that flew in there to get those guys out after they had been attacked.
Yeah.
So, you know, you get an opportunity to kind of butt up against some areas of history that, you know, you've heard about before.
Yeah.
That you just never, you know, thought, wow. So yeah, being right there on the spear of the Cuban Missile Crisis, I can imagine. So what did your dad ever say what that was like? I mean, what?
Oh, he talked about how tense it was, and he said that we literally, a lot of Americans don't realize how close we came to World War III.
Yeah.
Dad was there when they did they called it a quarantine. They didn't have a blockade. They had a quarantine.
Yep.
And he said that they would see these little trawlers. They called them fishing boats. He said you could tell they were Soviet spy ships. They had all the stuff on them, you know.
Yeah.
And he saw some of the ships, and he said it was very tense, and they didn't know, you know, what was going to happen. It was just, he said that when it was over, there was a big sigh of relief. Now, my dad, what's kind of funny, my dad was a very conservative Republican, but he always respected John F. Kennedy for that. Yeah. And he respected Kennedy because he was a Navy man, you know.
Yeah.
And so, but yeah, he talked about it being very tense, and that a lot of Americans had no idea how close we came to a nuclear war. And of course, he was in the Navy when they had the Bay of Pigs thing.
Oh yeah, yeah.
He wasn't involved in that, but the CIA was. He knew some guys. But I tell you, I will remember one thing he told me when he was on a cruise. They were in the Mediterranean, and they went to Naples, Italy. And there was a restaurant there that was an American restaurant right in Naples. And it was an American place. And he said had steaks, baked potatoes. Come to find out, the guy that owned it was Lucky Luciano, the gangster,
Oh, shoot.
who had been, kicked out of,
Yeah.
deported. And of course, he was raised in Chicago. And so Daddy said they were in there, and he came in there and gave them their meal on the house because they were sailors. And he said, my dad remembered that, got to meet Lucky Luciano. And said,
You know what? It's always interesting, some of the stories you hear from our veterans, especially some of the older ones.
Yeah.
Things that they live through. So Billy, we're going to take a quick break.
Okay.
And when we come back from the break on the other side, we'll continue our conversation.
All right, man.
All right. For those of you out there on the audience, stand by and we will be right back.
In service of our nation, you gave everything you had. You sacrificed your comfort, your peace, and sometimes even your well-being. Over 3 decades, Hill & Ponton has helped to be a guiding light for veterans seeking their rightful disability benefits. When our heroes are in need, we are not just lawyers. We're an ally, a team who understands the struggles you faced. If you're a veteran seeking the benefits you deserve, let us stand with you on this journey, because every battle deserves a hero, and no hero should fight alone.
All right, everyone, and welcome back to the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner. And we've been talking tonight with Billy Cagle, of course, who's been sharing the story about his father, William E. Cagle, who's a veteran of both the United States Army and the United States Navy. And Billy, before the break, we were talking about some of the interesting things that your dad had shared with you about the Cuban Missile Crisis and the Bay of Pigs being close to both of those events. So when did your dad finally get out of the Navy?
I want to say 1967.
Okay.
He never went to Vietnam. So,
Yeah.
of course, the Nam was big in 64 and 65, but he never went. But
Yeah.
he never did that. But like I said, when he got in the Navy, he wanted to learn a trade, and he became a electrician, and that's what he did for the rest of his life. He worked as an electrician, and he always was thankful for the Navy for giving him, that opportunity, the training and all of that. And so,
Yeah, I got to tell you, I mean, so many of our veterans who come on here, old and young, talk about what a great start the military gave them.
Oh yeah.
And I've had several veterans come on the show, and they're from the old school where they were given a choice of the military or jail. And
Oh yeah.
they went in, and they talked about how much the military did for them coming out, the other side, and providing not only that, how can I say that moral and ethical education that they needed, but then not only that, either taught them a skill, taught them leadership, taught them how to work, good work ethics, and that continues today. So, it was so good that your dad was able to bring that out of the military. And when did he finally retire as an electrician?
Well, he had to retire for health reasons around 1994. He would have worked longer, but he had a lot of bad. I can't remember the kind of cancer he had. My sister can tell you it was very rare. It had a real long name. He never lost his sense of humor. We went to the doctor, and they told him, they said, well, you've got a real rare case of cancer. And he said, well, I bought an air conditioner one time and nobody knew how to fix it. I figured I'd have a disease nobody knew how to fix. He never had, he never lost up until the day he died. He died on a Wednesday, and we knew he was dying, but even at the very end, he kept his sense of humor. He was that kind of guy, and but let me tell you so much about humor. Now, I will remember this story of the Army. He told me when he was in Alaska, he was on guard duty. Okay. And he said this young lieutenant right out of West Point was there and walked up to my dad and said, okay, you're standing guard. You look down the street. Here comes a battleship. What do you do? And my daddy said, I'm going to sink it. And the lieutenant says, where are you going to find a stupid torpedo in the middle of the street in Alaska? And my dad said, same place you got the
battleship,
got
right?
The battleship, sir. So,
you know what? I'm going to tell you, man, I'm going to share one with you that I had an experience with. It just reminded me of that. I was stationed at Fort Carson, Colorado, and I was in a CAP unit there. And of course, Fort Carson's landlocked in the middle of the United States.
Oh, yeah.
We had a unit down the street from us. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden, one day, here comes a low boy coming up to the gate of Fort Carson with a battleship anchor on the back of it.
Oh, my gosh.
And they brought that thing in and took it to one of the motor pools of the unit that it had been sent to.
Uh-huh.
And come to find out, the military had what they called a national stock number for all the parts and things they ordered.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody messed up the NSN and put an NSN down for a battleship anchor. Now, you would think, oh, man, they never lived that down. But you would think somebody would have caught that, ordering a battleship anchor at a landlocked Army base in the middle of Colorado.
And they didn't.
So, the service is full of, but that's pretty good. I like that. The same place you got that battleship.
That's what he said.
That's a good response for it, too.
Yeah. And I tell you, you're talking about the Navy. I tell you another one he told me, and he was in the Med. And I don't know if he was in Naples or if he was in Spain. I don't remember. But he was in a bar and said there was a guy sitting at the end of the bar that had on one of those caps like a yacht captain wears, He was a civilian. And he had sunglasses on. And Daddy said that he kept looking and thinking, I should know that guy, but I don't know that guy. And he kept staring at him. And finally, the guy jerked his sunglasses off and said, yes, I'm Jack Lemmon. He was the actor. And Daddy said he had enough liquor in him. He said, I don't give a blankety blank who you are. And said got up and stomped out and said, this guy said, well, nobody talks to Jack Lemmon like that. And my dad said, well, it's about time somebody does. and,
Yeah,
and
you know,
he
your
remembered
dad
that.
kind of reminds me of some of the old movies I used to watch, how some of those old crusty veterans were, you
Yeah.
know, and
Oh, yeah.
I ran into a few of those early in my Army career, some of the aging veterans that I served with.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, they sounded a lot like that. And it just kind of brings that back to mind. So your dad, let's see, he died in 2011, right?
Yeah, January. He died 3 months after my mother did. My mother had
Uh,
COPD. He had cancer. We thought he would die first. He was in really bad shape, but mother went down really fast. And when she died, he just kind of he didn't care. And
yeah.
3.5 months later, he was dead. So,
Well, by that time they had been married, what, 30 some years or
Oh, no, it's from 1956 to
50s?
from 1956 to 2011. So,
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah. My gosh.
yeah,
Ooh.
yeah.
They were up near 60 years.
Yeah, they married a long time. They were kids when they
Wow.
got married, I mean, they were kids. And I remember one time I asked my father, I said, Dad, was I adopted? And he looked at me and said, yes, son, you were, but they brought you back in about 30 minutes. So,
Oh man, I tell you.
and
You know, he
Paul, it's funny, when I was a kid, I looked nothing like my father. Nothing,
yeah,
nothing. And now, the older I get, I see pictures. I look just so much like him now. It's not even
yeah,
funny, not
yeah.
funny,
Sometimes you tend to see that as you get a little older.
Yeah.
And I mean, I look more like my mother's side of the family than my father's side.
Yeah.
But I remember first seeing my mom's oldest sister after I retired from the Army. I hadn't seen her in years. And I finally went to visit Delaware, and she come walking into the house over there. And I mean, oh my gosh, she was the spitting image of my dead grandmother.
Isn't that something?
I
Yeah.
mean, she could have been her twin sister at that point.
Well, my dad, his father was John Cagle. His mother, my grandmother, was Nancy Garrett. Her father was from Scotland, and he died. Now get this, Paul, how old they were. He was crushed to death in the mines in 1902. Okay. But we have a picture of him, and it looks just like my father. My father
Wow.
looked exactly like my grandfather, great granddaddy John Garrett. Exactly. Yeah. And my son, Andrew, at times looks just like my father. At times, different expressions or whatever, and it's just funny how you start looking like your parents and acting like your parents. My sister told me, I have a baby sister. She's 9 years younger than me, and we go out and eat Mexican food every Monday. And she'll say stuff like, you're just getting more like daddy every day. You're just getting, crotchety old man, so.
Well, let me ask you this, Billy. You sound like you do have a lot of fond memories of your dad, and it's growing up with him, and then being around him when he was older, and then you went on to school and spent 37 years pastoring churches and counseling troubled young people and things like that. And now that you're kind of somewhat retired, do you remember what part? I'm just going to kind of ask you here if you can think of it. Was there anything in particular about your dad that really influenced you?
Two things. Number one, he was a Christian. He loved the Lord. I remember when I was growing up for about the first 13 years, my dad drank a lot. He was just a gruff old guy, but he became a Christian, and he totally changed. He loved the Lord, and then I guess he just always looked for the bright side of everything. He had a good sense of humor. He just always believed that things would work out okay, that in the end it's going to be okay. And I guess one of the things that seeing him so sick, but yet he was always still had his dignity. Still, he didn't complain. Like I said, up until the day he died on a Wednesday night around 6:30 in the evening. And that day he was in a good mood, and he knew he was very, very sick, and we talked about death and dying, but I guess just his strength. He was a strong man. He was a lot like my granddaddy Cagle. My granddaddy had a big influence on my life. Just being strong, gave me a good work ethic. He was very proud that I was in the ministry.
Yeah.
I was the first person in my family to go to college. I was the first person in my family to get a master's degree. I was the first person in my family to get a PhD. So he was very proud of me, but he would joke and people would say, well, when did Bill feel like God was calling him to preach? And Daddy would say, well, he got up one morning and didn't want to go to work and was craving chicken. That's what, he would say that, but I guess just his strength, and he loved my mother so much. They were always in love. He just always loved my mother, up until the very day she died. She was always his sweetheart. It's kind of funny. They met when he was in the Army. I think he was at Fort McClellan when they met, but he went home and he was this is funny. He was on a double date. He was dating a girl named Irene Brown. They were the couple, Irene and my dad. Everybody knew that my dad and Irene Brown were going to get married. And my mother was Irene Brown's good friend, although she had never met my father because she was 5 years younger than my dad. And so Daddy picked up Irene, and Mother came along because she had a date with this other boy, and that was the last time my dad ever dated Irene Brown. And he saw my mother, and he called the next day and broke up with Irene, and then I think in 6 weeks they were married.
Wow.
Well, he didn't have a lot of time. He was in the Army, and they stayed married up until she died, And,
well, it really seems like, you have so many good memories of your dad.
Yeah.
And, being able to be around him, while he was in the service and see some of the things he did and hear about, the things he went through and to see your parents be together that long. It's it's kind of really something to kind of admire because some things have changed so much today, and some of these older stories you don't quite hear the same way.
Yeah.
But
one of the things I remember too, Paul, and I don't remember how old I was. I was old enough to know what was going on, but my dad was in the Navy. He was on the Saratoga. They were in the Aegean Sea, and it caught on fire. And I can't remember how many were killed, but there's two numbers that stick in my head, 36 or 160. I don't remember. But one of those numbers, that's how many men were killed. And of course, we didn't have internet or anything like that.
Yeah.
And we got word that the Saratoga had caught on fire. There was an explosion, and all those men were killed. And it was a couple of days before we finally got a telegram that he was okay,
Yeah.
But I remember living through that, not knowing if your dad was alive or not. I remember that. And but he was okay. But he talked about that. He said it was being a carrier. I don't know exactly what happened, but had a lot of jet fuel on there.
Oh, yeah.
That thing caught on fire and killed a lot of men. And he would talk about that some. But,
Well, you know what? I am really, really glad, and I'm thankful that you were able to come on and share the stories about your dad and what you remember about him. But before we wrap up the show, I just want to ask you one more thing.
Okay.
If there was one thought that you'd like to share with our audience, what would it be?
I would say, with all the uncertainties in our country right now, that I believe that as a people, as a nation, we still got a lot of good, solid people, man. You listen to the media, you hear a lot of the division, you hear a lot of the things that happen, but I know a lot of good people, Paul, than military and non-military. I work with a guy that me and him disagree on politics, but we're good friends.
Yeah.
And I find there's a lot more people like that than we want to realize, that we can get along pretty well. Most people can. There's fringes on both sides of the spectrum. You and I know that, but I think as a general rule, just be positive, believe in God, believe in the people that you surround yourself with good people, think positive, always try to look at the bright side of things.
Yeah.
God's in control, and that's what I tell people.
Well, Billy, I got to tell you, man, that's some good advice, brother. It's especially for nowadays. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time to join us this evening and share with us the story about your father and some of the memories you had of him. So thank you very much for spending time with us tonight.
Well, I'm honored, Paul. Thank you for having me, brother. It's good to see you, man. It's good to see you.
It's good to see each other like this again, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, you don't look like you did in '79.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't
nothing
either.
like it. Yeah.
I don't either. So, yeah.
All right. For those of you out there in the audience, again, we want to thank Billy for coming on the show tonight. And don't forget, for those of you watching the show, and we usually post our post-show information for anyone out there, the VFW is putting out a warning on their website. There are a lot of people out there, they call them claim sharks, and they're trying to swindle or scam veterans, trying to file claims under the PACT Act. And it's one of the things that's become noticeable because it's become so prevalent. So I wanted to share that with you tonight. For those of you who are out there, if you're still working on something under the PACT Act, or if you're thinking about it, go to the VFW website, take a look at the article so that you're well informed as to what's going on. I also want to just thank our audience in general for spending time with us tonight. And we also want to thank our veterans out there and their families. Thank you for your service. You've been watching the WGSN-DB Going Solo Veterans Corner on the new streaming network.com, and we hope to see you on our next show.